Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, just depending on where you might be. Thanks for joining us for a very important message on maintaining best practices with reference to batteries for your fleet. My name is Jessica Voss, Director of Supplier Marketing, representing both National East and CoreCentric today, and I'm speaking to you currently from Southwest Florida. Today, we're very pleased to have the experts at Interstate Batteries walk us through all of this detail. But before I hand things over to them, I want to remind everyone, you're currently on mute. We ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation or at any time during the presentation. You can utilize the question box on the right side of your screen. Please go ahead and enter in any comments or questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Greg Hicks with Interstate Batteries.
Thanks, Jess. Hey, welcome everyone. Appreciate you guys being with us today. A lot of you may know me already, but for those that don't, I'm Greg Hicks, Senior National Account Manager with Interstate Batteries. I'm joined by Mr. Jeff Barron, who heads up our Quality Assurance Lab at Interstate. Hey, Jeff. We also have Mr. Chris DeSantis with us from AIM Transportation Solutions. How you doing, Chris?
Good, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about Chris and his background. So Chris is with AIM, who is one of the largest commercial truck leasing companies in the country. Chris started working on trucks, way back in the late 80s. He was first a fleet service manager for AIM, and then eventually has moved into his current role as Director of Purchasing and Training. Chris also sits on the board for TMC and is chairman of the S1 Electrical Study Group. So Chris and Jeff are a couple of guys who know a ton about both trucks and batteries, and really appreciate them joining us today. So look, for you guys that are on the webinar, we're here to talk about keeping trucks on the road, and no matter who your battery provider is. So before we get started, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions during the webinar, you should see a Q&A field. If you'll type those in, we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. It should be in about 20 minutes or so. And then if we can't get to them in the webinar time frame, we'll certainly follow up directly with you guys. So hey, let's talk about what's going on today, right? Our world has certainly been turned upside down with the coronavirus pandemic, and few industries are more impacted, certainly than trucking, commercial trucking, right? There's a lot that is going on with some are just running at full capacity, trying to keep the supply chain moving. Unfortunately, there are others that are sitting idle. And of course, neither of those, right, overusage and underusage can certainly impact battery performance and life. And reefer units, lift gates, all these different things are really taxing on batteries today. And so avoiding downtime is key, and certainly downtime just isn't an option when we need these trucks up and moving and keeping the supply up and running. So one of the reasons we brought in Chris. So Chris and I have known each other for a few years. Chris and AIM, they had moved their purchasing a few years back from looking at batteries from a perspective of acquisition cost or CCA requirements and things that they needed. And over time, Chris took a good look at it to see what really makes the most sense for their application and usage. So as Chris is able to provide a perspective, right, from both fleet service manager as well as purchasing director of purchasing, and those two don't always see eye to eye, as we all know. So, Chris, maybe you could kind of share a little bit of what that's like and trying to maneuver through that.
Thanks, Greg. What we ran into a couple years ago, and I'm sure everybody else did too, when we got into the no idling laws, with more of our city delivery operations, food service operations, and liftgate style operations, we were running into more frequent breakdowns because the trucks were not idling anymore, keeping the batteries charged up. We were seeing shortened battery life because of that also, and we needed to come up with a solution for it. And working with Interstate, we came up with a good battery that would make that fit the 31 ECL due to its cycle life and having so many cycles available in the battery, but it also does reduce the cold cranking amps of the battery. And it was a tough process to get through with the purchasing department because, acquisition cost was higher for the ECL versus the battery we were using. So we needed to get something, discussed with the purchasing department. It took about 2 years to get over that upfront cost versus the total life cycle cost of that battery. So once we got past that hurdle, and it was probably, the hurdle probably came from the multiple breakdowns and customer complaints, that we were able to get past that hurdle. Immediately, we started to see a reduced breakdown cost, which you just can't measure, how much cost savings that is, versus the purchase price of the battery. We almost doubled our battery life in the stop and go operating customers that were using lift gates. And the good part about that conversion, and part of the results of that conversion, are since the conversion, we really don't talk about batteries anymore because the battery we chose is performing as we set it up and as it was designed. Now that I'm sitting back in purchasing and coming from a technical background and being involved with the TMC and everything, we can make these kind of decisions a little bit faster now that we know the life cycle costs, and our ROI is very quick on the changeover for this type of item.
Awesome, thank you for that, Chris. That's certainly a good testimonial. We certainly love to hear that you're not having to think about batteries, right? You're just focused on serving your customers and keeping your fleet up and running. So love to hear that. One of the things that I pulled out of what you had mentioned is service, roadside, service calls and the cost associated with that, right? That's always something that no one likes to bear the brunt of. So one of the companies that we had spoken to that runs reefer units, lift gates, said they were seeing as much as 85% of their roadside calls related to battery failures, which is just really, really tough, right, to have that many. So, hey, real quick, we're going to pause here for just a second. Should be a poll question. Should see a box on the side of your screen, guys. If you would, just type in an approximate percentage of your road service calls that are caused by battery issues. And we'll get to, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get to those results toward the end and certainly speak to that. So.
Hey, Greg, I'm just going to give it just a second. Some results are still coming in, and once we collect those, I'm going to close and we'll be able to proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Jess. All right, so let's thank you guys for answering that poll question. We'll get to those results shortly. So let's kind of get back to the presentation, right? We're talking about a lot of people focus on acquisition cost versus total cost of ownership. And let's talk about, right, what are those, what's the impact, right, that has when you have early battery failures. Not only is it roadside, service costs, but it can impact your frequency of service to your customer, right? Cause you to have late deliveries, missed deliveries, certainly towing costs, road service costs, as we mentioned. And there are even penalties, right, for late deliveries. So all of those things can certainly add up when, kind of as Chris spoke to, some of those things potentially can be avoided up front, right, by ensuring that you match up the right battery for your application. So one of the other misconceptions, guys, that we see and hear about is bigger is better. Hey, I want the highest CCA battery you got. That's what I need. Well, is that really what you need? So we're going to ask Mr. Jeff Barron to speak into that a little bit. Jeff, can you talk about that for us?
You betcha. Thanks, Greg. So your cold cranking amps, I mean, that's always done at 0 degrees. So the way that the batteries are designed, they're going to output that rated CCA value for 30 seconds. It's part of the SAE standard that you run the test on. And so it's designed to meet that rated spec for 30 seconds and not drop below 7.2 volts within that 30 seconds. So not necessarily having, that high CCA value when you're just, driving this truck around from, hub to hub. So you don't typically need all that. And we look at the way that most of these trucks are set up, where you've got either 2 batteries or 4 batteries set up. And, from hub to hub, you're not really that involved as far as needing a high CCA value. And we kind of look at this, horsepower versus torque. You can have all the horsepower in the world, but if you don't have the torque to get anything down the street, well, guess what? You're just defeating your purpose there. So we want to look at the high cycling aspects of it, as you guys were talking earlier about these no idle laws. So a lot of these drivers that end up doing multiple stops during the day, not necessarily in need of a high CCA value, but they need something that's going to be along the cycling, because when you pull up and you turn that truck off, the unfortunate thing is you still have to have lights and everything on, so that way people know that you are there. And so you're pulling from the battery as it's setting idle. So we want to make sure that we've got a high cycling battery in there to make sure that when we come back out to crank that thing up to go to our next stop, that we're going to have that capability of doing that. And it doesn't always require a high value on a CCA. So we look at the way that these batteries are designed, and when you look at a high CCA value, you've got lots of plates within these batteries. And you could have upwards of 120 plates within this whole confines of the 31 group size battery. And so they're designed to output that high CCA value at any given time. So when your truck's already warm, it's not going to need a big CCA cranking value. If you're sitting there with the engine off and you're 5 minutes and you got to come back out and crank it up and go, you got to have something that's going to be able to keep up with it. So it doesn't need, over 100 plates. You've got to have something that's got enough lead material and paste material in there to make these things work. So it's all about the build and the chemistry difference in there. We offer a lot of benefits in the ECL battery with a fiber mesh that actually is on the envelope to keep it. Basically, when you're discharging and recharging a battery, you're going in and out on sulfuric acid through this paste material. And what that does is, over time, it starts shedding the paste material off of the lead grid. Well, this fiber mesh here is designed to keep that paste material still on the grid. So that way you don't have any paste shedding, which basically runs down into what we call real estate. If you don't have enough real estate to work off of as far as your reserve or your CCA, well, you've lost your power availability. So we want to make sure that we've got that all taken care of. And Chris, you'd been talking with us earlier about some of the things that you guys deal with. Give me a little insight on what it is that you guys are working with and some of the things, the constraints that come into play.
Well, with the cold cranking amps, in today's environment, we're slowly changing over from a 15W40 to a 10W30 oil. And in doing so, the oil's thinner in the colder environments and ambient temperatures in the winter. So, all the cold cranking amps aren't quite needed like they were in the past either. Although, with the ECL, we're still seeing enough cranking amps in the cold ambient temperatures. So.
Well, and I would also think, Chris, that as we're moving along with the industry itself and how things change, we also bring into to account the efficiency now on how these things are designed to actually crank up versus 10 to 15 years ago on how these diesels were designed to crank. So there's a huge difference there as well, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, starters improvements and the electronics of the engine, they crank faster, harder, and easier.
So it makes a huge difference in there. So when we look at CCAs, I mean, yeah, there are points where you do need a high CCA value, and we talk about cold weather. Not that Texas endures much of that, but in these northern states, there is a lot of cold weather you guys have to deal with. So we understand that, and making sure that you do have the CCA value recommended by your OE vehicle, whether it's a Volvo or Peterbilt, Kenworth, whatever. Make sure that you are accommodating what they have specified for a CCA value. So that way at least you've got coverage. But then you also look at the other side of it on your cycling. Even though you're in this cold environment, you've also run into that same issue where the no idle comes into play, and you've got to have that reserve capacity power that's going to be able to cycle through all these different stops. And we know that there's AGM product out there that a lot of these OE builders now are putting in there. And for us, AGM's great. There are some drawbacks on AGM product. AGM stands for absorbed glass mat, by the way. And there's kind of drawbacks which come into Chris's unfortunate wheel well as far as cost. They're not cheap, are they, Chris?
Nope. Got to look out for us purchasing managers. So
exactly. So when you look at that side of it, you've got to also realize that we have to be able to work with you guys as well as making sure that the batteries work with the equipment that you've got. So we talk about the cycling aspects of all the different suppliers that are out there. And of course, on the chart that you're seeing here, we're actually comparing cycle life testing, which is one of the requirements on TMC. And Chris knows all about TMC. He's been there with them for quite a while as far as being on their evaluation sides. So we look at cycling characteristics, and we see the CCA is fine. We've got a 700 CCA on the ECL versus a 950 up to 1,000. But as you look at the cycle life comparison, which is a J2185, it's a high temperature commercial cycle life that TMC requires to be ran on batteries. And so you guys can see the progression of what we have on an ECL of 650 cycles versus as you drop on the CCA side, increase on the CCA side, you drop on the cycling side. So I don't want to come back to that old analogy of you get what you pay for, but when you look at the overall big picture, there's a huge difference in the way these things will actually cycle. Now, does every truck need an extreme cycle life battery, the 31 ECL, or something that's going to cycle at this magnitude? Not every truck is going to need that. All right, so we want to make sure that everybody kind of understands that. And Chris, some of the things you kind of talked to us, a few weeks back about some of the things that you have in place in your shop. So give me a little background on what it is that you guys do that kind of make this program on your side work really well.
Well, with the 31 ECL, we ran it across the board. So the technicians didn't have too many choices, put the wrong battery in the wrong application. It costs a little bit more maybe for an over-the-road truck, but that's okay as long as we're getting the right battery in the right application where the lift gates are. So choosing the right battery, is obviously the key, but speccing the truck all together, and matching RP 129 from the TMC out of the factory is also a key spec. we like to overspec our alternators a little bit, put higher amp alternators in than we need, but we also want to make sure that alternator has a good low speed charging curve, because most of those operations are going traffic light to traffic light. They're not getting high RPMs where the older alternators used to get their highest output. We need high output at low RPM. So you need to spec an alternator that comes with that. Remote sensing is a key. If it's not in your spec now, make sure remote sense alternators are in your spec. We test with a good high quality electronic tester at every single PM. We test the battery bank as a whole for capacitance, and if we find an issue, we take apart that whole battery pack, test each battery individually. Otherwise, if the battery passes with the high quality electronic tester, we just move on at the PM. But we do make a point that every fall before winter hits, we take apart every battery, every ground, clean them, put them back together right before winter hits, so that we know we're good and we know we've load tested everything coming into the next winter season.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we always recommend. We do a lot of commercial and automotive classes, training classes for the electrical side, and so that is something that we really recommend at your PM intervals. Make sure that you're checking all the pack out. Now, one thing that we will really shy away from, and we kind of put that back on the purchasing manager, unfortunately, we don't really recommend putting a new battery in a older pack of batteries. And the reason we kind of shy away from that is you're putting a brand new product in something, let's just say, that's a year and a half or 2 years old. So what it's going to do to that new battery is bring it down to the level of the old batteries. Now, is it and especially now that we've got COVID-19 going on, is it beneficial, or is it, feasible for you guys to be doing just one battery within these things? Well, we need to look at the other side of it, as Chris alluded earlier about, breakdowns on the road. So we've got a lot of trucking fleets that we've dealt with throughout all these years that we've been working with them. They have what we call a charging station within the different terminals. And what they basically do is, if they're replacing one or two batteries, they go ahead and replace the whole pack. And then these other batteries, they're conductance tested and see what the power availability is still there. And they basically put these batteries together, group them together, to where you've got the same, discharge characteristics as far as power with your CCA and aged batteries. So this kind of keeps everything to where you're not pulling away from a new battery because of this old battery. And when you're doing all this cleaning and everything on your PMs, neutralize any of this corrosion that you see on the terminals. A lot of people will just do a wire brush and thinking that's got it. Well, you got to remember, metal has pores in it. This sulfuric acid will actually get within those pores. So we need to make sure that we've got all that neutralized. Baking soda and water makes a fantastic neutralization. Once you get it neutralized, you get it rinsed off, you get it dried off, and then hook everything back up. Once you get it hooked back up, put you a spray protector over that. That way you've got something to be able to work with. All right. That's all I've got on my side. And Chris, do you want to add anything, or Greg?
Wow, thanks, Jeff and Chris, both of you, man. Good information. Certainly appreciate you guys, Jeff, going into that in depth, and Chris, your experience and of course how you guys have worked to address issues and prevent downtime. Really appreciate you guys going into that. So I think that pretty much covers the majority of it. If you guys don't mind, we'd love to move to the Q&A portion. If you'll stick around, we'll see if we can answer some of the questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Greg. We do have a couple of questions, comments that came through. Let me read through them real quickly. The first one being from Matt Hashimoto. Matt, hopefully I didn't butcher your name. I believe this is more of a comment, but he just says extreme cold temperatures during the winter, along with the lights on while it stops, The truck manufacturers just put a standardized battery in the trucks, and they don't take into consideration where the truck is going and really do the study on what battery should be the best area for where it's going to.
Yeah, that makes good sense because you really don't know. Even if you built this truck, let's say in Minnesota, I mean, is it really going to stay in Minnesota or is it going to go to southern Florida? So yeah, it's really good to kind of know where the truck might end up and make sure that you've got that the battery coverage in there rather than have the wrong battery for the wrong application.
Then another question, Chris, for you, and I think going back to your example and the conversation that if you could go back and have that conversation with your purchasing manager, how would you do that so that it doesn't take 2 years to make the switch?
I would say first thing you need to do is do your homework. Show what the breakdown cost that you have for your company currently that's battery related. Show them the difference in the current battery you're using and the life cycles that are in it versus the cycling of a cycling style battery like a 31 ECL. And then if you can, double the battery life or even take, a quarter of the battery life, you can show them the math over a 2-year period on how much money your company will actually save versus spend in the initial upfront cost.
Thanks, Chris. Another question I have from Cyro Laser. What AGM battery do you recommend?
Well, there's several AGM batteries that we actually offer out there now. Pure lead product, which is our 31 AGM7, when you look at the overall cycle life of those, I mean, it's astronomical. That's why they're not a cheap battery. We've also got some lower grade AGMs that worked really well. You will not get the compared cycle life like you would on the 31 AGM7, but you'll still get some really good life. One of the key factors on AGM is making sure that you've got the correct charging going back into the batteries. I mean, a lot of people, we know that AGM, will accept a charge quicker, but on the other side of that, you've got to make sure that the charging voltage and amperage are actually getting to the battery. And that's where, Chris was talking earlier about the remote sense leads. That's where that comes into play. You may be outputting 14.2 at the alternator, but by the time it gets back to the batteries, it may only be about 13.6, 13.7. Well, any battery is going to have more than that to be able to survive. So, those are the top applications you really need to look at and make sure that you got coverage to make them work. Hopefully that kind of answered it in a broad perspective anyway.
Perfect. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but go ahead, anyone that has one or a comment, go ahead and use the question box and we'll get through those. Also wanted to go ahead and post the results of the poll that was earlier. So there you go. If you guys want to speak through those results.
Wow, look at that, 50 to 75%.
Yeah.
40% of them, that's certainly in line with some of the people that we've talked and that had 85% of theirs related to batteries. So that's certainly, something that we encourage you guys to consider. Look, I know we're running short on time. We're gonna wrap up. Thank you all so much. Jeff, Chris, thanks for your help. Jess, everyone who attended, we really appreciate this. If you have questions, please let us know. We're open and able to, willing to assist. Thank you again for your time. Jess, is there anything else you need to add?
I just want to add one quick comment. You should expect a survey following this presentation, a quick survey that should be pretty quick to answer. So as a follow-up, just expect that in your email. And I'll turn it back over to you, Greg, and the rest of the team to close out today's call.
Awesome.
Again, Jeff, Chris, thank you for your time. Everyone who helped put this together, and of course, certainly those in attendance. Please reach out to us. You've got the buyer's guide information there. If you have questions, and again, we'll follow up with a survey. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and let's keep those trucks running.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
wonderful day,
Appreciate it.
everybody.